Well, what a game that we just witnessed between the Arizona Coyotes and the Toronto Maple Leafs. I'm Jake Varco, and I'm joined by my guest here today, Jori. How are you doing tonight?
Well, I'll be honest. I'd be doing a little better if the Leafs were able to finish that one off. But pleasure to be on once again. Honor and a privilege, as I said last time, and looking forward to kind of diving into this one.
It's going to be a fun show. We're going to have a lot to talk about, a lot to dissect from this game. The Maple Leafs flipped the script in a way. It was 4-1. Unfortunately, they couldn't uh, finish it, seal the deal. They couldn't take this W against the Arizona Coyotes. And at the end of this game, there was a controversial non call against Austin Matthews. I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, you could see that Matthews was as hot as anything as they're coming back. Chikrin grabs his stick there, and I mean, they said it on the broadcast during regulation. That's a call, and I mean, what more can you say other than the refs really blew that one? You know, it's a call at any other time in any other game you would hope, and it really just kind of speaks to the issue of just a lack of just consistency with the referees. Right? They need to make these calls and to put the whistle away. Not only with the Matthews call, but then also just prior to that with the Tavares call, and even in the third period, there was for both sides a lot of borderline stuff that they could have called. It's a huge issue that the league desperately, in my opinion, needs to address.
Well, absolutely. It is something the league needs to address. There needs to be more consistency with these calls. And that's something that really, not only in hockey, but we see it in almost every sport. There needs to be more consistency with the officiating. And as someone who's an umpire, I've been an umpire in baseball for 12 years. It's not easy, but there are calls that you just need to get right. And that was one of them in the dying moments of an overtime thriller.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I bumped as well in the past, and I empathize a lot of the time more than maybe the average viewer would with the refs. I mean, especially at the NHL level, obviously it's not everything's black and white, but I mean, you're at the NHL level. There's no there's no off games the same way that for a player, you can't take a game off. The refs really need to be held, in my opinion, to a higher standard, and it's not really clear if it's a case of the NHL is telling them to make calls like this, or it's in the NHL's or rather the referee's discretion. But it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and I don't know if it's gonna come in the form of a memo from the league. I don't know if it's a case of maybe the players and the coaches start to speak out a little more. I mean, it's just really difficult to, call these games almost fair, is the word I'd maybe use, when the refs are just blatantly missing stuff for both sides, really.
Yeah, it's a problem. And you have to think that if the Toronto Maple Leafs got a power play in this game, they're the first ranked power play in the NHL, even though they've had struggles on the power play unit as of late. The Arizona Coyotes have the second worst penalty kill in the National Hockey League. You'd have to assume that if the Maple Leafs do get a power play, they would likely win this hockey game, whether that be in the third period or on that Austin Matthews non call. But I do have an opinion that a lot of fans in this comment section probably are not going to be happy about. And that is, hear me out. That is, yes, that was a blatant missed call. But Austin Matthews, I get he's a star player. I get he wants to have his voice heard by the referees. But in that play, in that scenario, he's got to hightail it back to the defensive zone and try to make a defensive play there. Go to the ref after the whistle.
Yeah, and again, I don't know that I agree 100%, but you've got the absolutely kind of the right idea, is that I get that maybe he's at the end of a shift and gassed, but to yell that out in the middle of the shift, right? I appreciate what he's going for, but you're not going to get that call if the play's already been made, and the ref hasn't done anything, right? And I struggle to fault Matthews for that necessarily, especially given kind of where you stand with that. But I certainly see where you're coming from, just because you can't give up on a play like that. You're gonna end up costing your team the game. And I mean, sure, you need to make, a save, and we'll get to Peter Mrazek, I imagine, shortly, but it's just not something that you can really do, especially when it's a 3-on-3 OT.
Yeah, definitely not something you can do in those do or die moments. And if this was a playoff game, that would be like, imagine this happened in a playoff game. I feel as if there would be a lot more people criticizing Austin Matthews for that, yelling at the referee, which I completely understand his frustration, but I don't like the way he handled the situation. I think he should have got back there and tried to make a play. Again, like, just go to the referee after the play. The referee's got his whistle in his pocket. He's not going to take it out because the star player yells at him while the play is going on.
Yeah, and again, you could see after the play, even he was hot as all things. He was giving it to the ref, and I believe John Tavares also went up to the referee after the play because he'd been hauled down in the offensive zone moments prior. So the whole shift kind of, the Leafs really kind of, in that one particular instance, really kind of got, pardon the language, really got screwed, and I think ideally the Leafs are able to, fight through that and ultimately bring the puck back the other way. But for Matthews to obviously, kind of focus his attention on the referee, it does ultimately cost them the game to a degree. But I think that there's kind of a lot of different elements, even beyond that really kind of are significant in that last stretch.
And you know what? Not only like the Austin Matthews play at the end, we could talk about that for hours, but we got to move past that at some point because there are so many other underlying issues with this team that cost them to lose this game to the bottom feeder Arizona Coyotes. You can look at the goaltending in this game. Peter Mrazek, that was an atrocious effort from Peter Mrazek tonight. He was like a fish flopping out of water. 4 goals allowed on 12 shots faced.
Yeah, I mean, if you even want to go through each of the goals, the first goal, I mean, he's completely out of position. He's lost. The second goal is going to end up on some kind of top 10 worst goals list maybe this season. I mean, he is extremely fortunate that Alex Nedeljkovic maybe gave up the worst goal of the season maybe 15, 20 minutes later, and that obviously took over the Twitter sphere. But I mean, Mrazek just has been so lost out there, and he's had his moments. He's looked good, but he really is not settled in, even since that injury, really at the beginning of the season. And it's been nothing but rough seas with him. And tonight, especially against the Arizona Coyotes of all teams, just you cannot go forward with Peter Mrazek in net, and it's such a shame because going in, he looked like the right guy for the team. I mean, he was a really solid goalie in Carolina, but just a dreadful performance, and a string of many for him, unfortunately.
Yeah, it has not been an easy going for Peter Mrazek here in Toronto, and he looked shell shocked out there tonight. He looked like he never was comfortable at any point in this game. The first save he made, it was like an odd glove save, and it bounced right back out to an Arizona Coyotes player. Luckily, he recovered from that one, but out there tonight, just not his night, and you could see the expression in his face. He looked like he just wanted to be pulled from the game, and that's not what you want from a goaltender, especially when Jack Campbell, your other 1A, 1B goaltender, is out right now.
Yeah, I mean that's the other huge news going into tonight. Obviously, out a minimum of 2 weeks with that rib injury, and you know the Leafs for a while now have needed someone to step up, and that injury really exacerbates that, right? I mean, you're not going to win games if you're not getting saves. And there was a graphic on the Sportsnet broadcast that I think really highlighted their struggles. They've had 1 month with goaltending above 900. It's been just nothing but just there. There really isn't a word for it. It's just been dreadful. And, you know, Campbell's injury exacerbates that so dramatically that Mrazek needs to step up, and for him to come out and just put this performance out there is nothing short of shocking, if we're being honest, right? And Shalgren, I'm a huge fan of what he showed tonight, and he really showed a lot of resiliency. And we can hope and pray that he's the Leafs Jordan Binnington, but just astonishing stuff from Mrazek, and he just looked lost.
He did look lost, and I liked what we saw from Shelgren as well. You know what? He got thrown into the fire. He was literally thrown into a pack of coyotes tonight, and I mean he fared pretty well out there considering. I really liked what I saw from him, but I don't think you want to rely on him as someone who's going to be in goal going forward. And Peter Mrazek, I don't know how you can continue to play him the way he's been performing. But the Maple Leafs don't really have many options, especially with Jack Campbell sidelined.
Yeah, I mean, you've got maybe Joe Wall as another option, but I mean, you don't really want to use him. You've got Michael Hutchison, who I mean, we've seen what he's capable of, which is not much at the NHL level. They brought in Carter Hutton as a backup to a backup to a backup to a backup. He was just dreadful when he played for the Coyotes earlier this season. They don't really have options. And, Shalgren, I actually thought looked pretty spectacular. He had that one save in overtime, and it damn near resulted in a Leafs goal. He made that spectacular pad save, and the rebound comes out to William Nylander. He comes streaking down, and he almost puts the thing in the net, right? So Shalgren showed a lot of resiliency, and he was perfect when he was called upon at 5-on-5. Unfortunately, 3-on-3 OT, it just wasn't meant to be. But I'm a big believer just based on the fact that he looked really steady in there. And that hasn't been something that the Leafs have seen basically since about November or December.
Yeah, it's been quite some time since the Maple Leafs have had steady goaltending. You think back to when Jack Campbell he was actually being talked about as a Vezina candidate early in the season, and that he was outstanding. He was among the league's best goaltenders, if not the NHL's best goaltender at the time. And now the Toronto Maple Leafs find themselves in this situation where they don't have many options with Campbell sidelined. Peter Mrazek has been iffy at best, and Shalgren, I mean, he might be who the Toronto Maple Leafs turn to Sunday for the Heritage Classic game. Like we've been saying, he actually overcame a lot of adversity tonight, considering the fact this is his first NHL appearance with the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he came in when the Maple Leafs were getting absolutely destroyed. So good for him. But again, it's not someone the Maple Leafs want to rely on, but it looks like they're going to have to here.
Yeah, and I mean, there's of course all the talk about Fleury, and there was an insider trading earlier today where Pierre LeBrun mentioned that it was something the Leafs had investigated, but it doesn't sound like it's going to happen because Fleury doesn't seem to want to come to Toronto. And I mean, outside of Fleury, there really is not a lot of options. And besides, goaltending is such voodoo. It's so unpredictable that expending multiple assets to pick up a goalie rental is risky at best. I mean, you think way back to 2006, Dwayne Rollison, and I really can't think of too many other guys that were rentals that really nailed it. I mean, it's just such an unpredictable position that the Leafs are really between a rock and a hard place. And if Shalgren goes out and he looks good in the Heritage Classic, I mean, good for him. I don't know that I'd necessarily trust him. I mean, it'd be such a phenomenal story if he took the reins, but it's all questions right now in Leafland, and Mrazek had such an opportunity to silence those, and then he does that. I mean, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah, that's the thing. You would expect Peter Mrazek to go into this game with extra motivation. I know you never want to see a player get injured, but Jack Campbell's sideline. This is an opportunity tonight for Peter Mrazek really to take the throne as the Maple Leaf starting goaltender, and he went out there and put on a dumpster fire performance. And now we're left with this conversation of who are the Maple Leafs going to go playing goal in the Heritage Classic and what's going to happen going forward. Uh, the thought of bringing in a goaltender is really compelling because really the options that the Maple Leafs have in net haven't proved to be haven't proved to be very good right now. I mean, they have their moments. Jack Campbell's proved that, so has Peter Mrazek, but lately it's been a disaster to watch.
for sure. And I can see people in the comments, of course, mentioning Holtby. I see mentioning Ville Husso as well as a guy that you'd love to get, but it's tough, to try to get one of these guys because those teams themselves are really in the mix. I mean, Holtby, if I recall, has been kind of so this year. He's bounced back nicely, but and I think Ville Husso's kind of taken the job from Binnington in St. Louis. So you're really kind of short on options here, and you really need Shalgren or I guess Mrazek has to show that tonight's a one off. Except it hasn't been a one off. It's been repeatedly that he's struggled.
Yeah, I really it's hard to figure out what the answer is for this team. I think this is something that they need to figure out internally though. If they do go the route of external trying to find a goaltender in the trade market, it's going to be very hard to do so. And maybe it's right in front of our eyes. Maybe they do pull the trigger on a Marc-Andre Fleury, but we'll see how that turns out. And I agree with you. Like, I can't think of a rental goaltender that has actually taken his team to the Stanley Cup in recent years. So it's going to be hard for them to overcome either way.
Yeah, and I don't think that this should also detract from the fact that the Leafs looked pretty good tonight. They way outpossessed the Coyotes by expected goals, is which functionally is kind of a weighted shot metric where the closer you take the shot to the net, the more likely the puck is obviously to go into the net. So that shot would be worth more than say a shot from the blue line. The Leafs really dominated. I mean, I've got the numbers in front of me, and the Leafs outpossessed the Coyotes 70% to 30% by Corsi. So just raw pucks on net. And then, I mean, by expected goals, they were equally as dominant. They had about 70% there as well. So, they looked good by and large. It's really just kind of a case of you just need someone to stop the puck.
They do need someone to stop the puck. I don't know, maybe they call up David Ayers or something, but the I don't know what the answer is. The I believe it's now 10 of their last 11 games they've allowed 3 or more goals, and these games have been a lot of bottom feeder teams or teams that aren't competing for a playoff spot. Teams such as the Columbus Blue Jackets, Vancouver Canucks, Montreal Canadiens, Seattle Kraken, Arizona Coyotes tonight. And when I'm looking at the schedule coming up for the Toronto Maple Leafs, they need to figure this out really fast. They have the Buffalo Sabres Sunday, but after that, the stretch of the season is not going to be easy. They have 3 games against the Florida Panthers, 2 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, Boston Bruins, and Washington Capitals. And then they also face the Carolina Hurricanes and Nashville Predators. So they're actually going to be playing some much tougher competition going down the stretch of the season, and they need to find answers quick.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, how do you see those kind of games going?
Well, the way that they're playing right now, honestly, if they can't get it's more of a goaltending thing. If they cannot get someone to stop pucks, just be a brick wall back there, then I foresee them losing a lot of these games. I really do. You're not going to outscore the Tampa Bay Lightning, Florida Panthers, and Boston Bruins. You're not going to win games by simply outscoring them on a nightly basis. You have, let's see, uh, okay, so you have 9 games coming up against Florida, Tampa, Boston, Washington combined. Those are valuable points within the same division. Those are going to be games that can really decide where the Maple Leafs end up in the standings and who they play in the playoffs. Dare I say, if they end up qualifying for the playoffs.
I won't go that far. The Leafs are pretty much a lock to make the playoffs, and I don't think it's worth it to fret about that. I do think it's worthwhile to fret about if they'll be in a division spot. I mean, Boston right on their tail, just a handful of points back, and they're gonna have to figure this out. I do think also something to consider is it's such a testament to the team that they have been able to outscore these issues and come away winning. You know, I think they were 5-4 and 2 over this last stretch, which is remarkable given that they haven't been able to get a save. It's going to be interesting, and you're not going to score 5 goals on Andre Vasilevsky. You're going to struggle to score 5 goals on Sergei Bobrovsky the way that he's been this season. And I mean, even the Bruins, they've been struggling with their goaltending, but that even has to a degree straightened itself out a little bit. So they're really kind of in a tough spot here, and the schedule doesn't get any easier. And the Heritage Classic, I think, is going to be a real kind of marker game, even just to show that they can kind of regain some composure as the schedule progresses and gets tougher.
Well, I can think of probably a million storylines for this upcoming Sunday and why it's a big game. Like, you have division rival Buffalo Sabres, who the Toronto Maple Leafs always seem to struggle against. They're always in a tightly contested game, or a Buffalo Sabres blowout like last Thursday. Or there's another storyline in who's going to be the starting goaltender. Uh, there's so many storylines surrounding this game coming up Sunday, but it's it's really the thing. Like, yeah, it's a pressure thing too.
Mhm.
This is a bigger stage than a regular season game. It's an outdoor venue, more fans. Obviously, that comes with more media attention. So it is a big stage for them, and it's an opportunity for them to hopefully prevail from in that scenario. But it remains to be seen what this team can do in these high pressure moments, and going up against these lackluster teams struggling to come away with victories is a real concern for me.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, a friend of the program, Malcolm Kelly, former CBC journalist, famously likes to say that never bet on the Maple Leafs to beat the Buffalo Sabres because the Leafs have a penchant for not showing up when it's those types of teams, especially when it's the Buffalo Sabres. I mean, we'll see what happens on Sunday. I mean, I don't know about yourself. I'm excited for that one. I mean, it's always it's always fun to see the Maple Leafs under the bright lights wherever it may be. I think back to some really iconic moments. The Bozak shootout winner back in 2014. I mean, Austin Matthews just absolutely making his presence known in 2017. Maybe don't need to get into the game against the Capitals. That one, of course, not as fondly remembered, but it's always a pleasure to watch the Maple Leafs on those big stages and see them perform. And the way things are trending right now, it's kind of in the air when it shouldn't be, because it's the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? I'm excited for that game. I will be in attendance for that game. I'll have a video posted afterwards. Maybe I'll do a preview from Tim Hortons Field as well. But since we're on the topic of outdoor games here, I'll shift over and ask you this. Do you have a favorite outdoor game in the NHL that you remember watching?
Oh, you've put me on the spot here.
I did.
No, I think that the 2014 one, I have such wonderful memories of that. I remember New Year's Day. I was away on vacation with my family at the time, and we were scouring high and low to find a video of this game, just because we were in the States, and it was Detroit versus Toronto, and it was just it wasn't something that was on their radar there. And we were fortunate enough to track down someone watching the game. And I recall we were able to watch it. And, as kind of a family, we were able to see that shootout. And I mean, it had been the first time in so long that they were doing anything relevant. I mean, if you think back to that era of the Maple Leafs, they had just come off that 2013, collapse. They'd spent the last 7 years prior to that just playing really bad hockey. And it was the first time a Canadian team had played in the Winter Classic, and the Maple Leafs showed that they could, do it on the biggest stage. Now, mind you, about say 4 to 6 weeks after that, it was one of their, numerous 18 wheelers, and that would ultimately result in them drafting William Nylander at the end of the year, a personal favorite in terms of the way he plays the game. Really appreciate William Nylander and what he brings, but you know that outdoor game really kind of stands out to me as a really memorable one.
That definitely was a really memorable outdoor game. It was awesome to see the Toronto Maple Leafs finally selected for one of those outdoor games and on a grand stage like that. And it was a really exciting time. I do recall that game. But my favorite outdoor game of all time, it's not a Toronto Maple Leafs one. I'm going back to the 2008 Winter Classic at Ralph Wilson Stadium in Buffalo when the Pittsburgh Penguins defeated the Buffalo Sabres 2-1 in a shootout. And I loved those baby blue Pittsburgh Penguins jerseys. Those were beautiful.
Yeah, and that image of Crosby celebrating that winner, or maybe it was I don't exactly recall if it was a shootout winner, or maybe
It
he had
was.
just scored a goal, but I mean that image of him celebrating is burned into my mind, and the snow falling all around him. That's one of the most iconic images, I think, basically of the last 15 years or so in terms of the NHL, and just a really phenomenal game I remember.
Yeah, and that's what all these outdoor games are about. Hopefully, it's not too cold, not too hot, and we don't have a repeat of Lake Tahoe last year. But I'm definitely really excited to go to Sunday's game. But we'll shift back to tonight's game, cover the three stars of the game, and the first star of the game from the Arizona Coyotes. Uh, I'm sure this will spice up trade discussions in this comment section, but it's Jacob Chitrin scored 2 goals out there, showing off what he can do.
Yeah, and Chikrin's had a really up and down year in it, and it's a bit of a kind of a question mark if that's been a case of the team he's on, or if that's a case of maybe he's just lacking the kind of the mojo in terms of just being on a team that's kind of mailing it in, or if he's actually been pretty poor. But I mean, you look at tonight's game, I think he looked pretty solid out there. I'm I'm not necessarily the biggest trade for Jacob Chikrin guy. I just struggle to see kind of where he necessarily fits on the blue line. But I mean, surely a game like this will have people salivating at the thought of him potentially even being linked to the Maple Leafs.
Well, I mean, I think he would be a great addition to any team. Personally, uh, if he were to get traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, which I personally don't think it will happen, but we will see. You never know. Uh, there's obviously, I think, 10 days until the trade deadline, so there's a lot of time for movement still. Anything is possible, as Kevin Garnett would say. But over his past 2 games as a defenseman, Chychrun has 4 goals and an assist. He has 5 points in his last 2 games, which obviously he's a defenseman. The offensive production is not the main focal point of what you want to see from them, but it's just an addition, icing on the cake. And I really think he's a great player in a bad situation that reflects some of his poor numbers, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I would agree that it's probably some kind of mixture of both, and it's going to be really interesting what the Coyotes choose to do, because there's really no bigger asset as the deadline approaches than Jacob Chikrin, and there's a lot of teams that I'm sure will be in the mix. Just off the top of my head, I mean, the Kings might make some sense as well. I mean, it's always fun to throw the New York Rangers in there. They've got all those young players, and they're trying to make a push. So that's certainly a name I think to keep an eye on. And a performance like that tonight with 2 goals only going to further fuel that.
Yeah, absolutely. He was outstanding out there tonight. Just a great performance from him again and showcasing what he can do ahead of the trade deadline. I think that he is quite the valuable asset with a favorable contract to any Stanley Cup contender that is willing to give up the assets to pull him in.
Absolutely. And I think kind of on the topic of maybe trade assets, if you want to move to the second star and who that may be.
So, all right, tonight's second star of the game, and I'll let you cover this one.
Yeah, so Alex Kerfoot, of course, with a big game tonight, he had that goal to kind of shift the momentum and a couple of big assists, including the assist on the William Nylander tying goal. And I mean, for a guy who's had his name in trade rumors for as long as I can really remember him being a Maple Leaf, Kerfoot's really kind of come into his own and really showed some chemistry tonight with the Tavares and Nylander duo. And is he a guy that is out the door if they need to match salary? If the Maple Leafs were to make a hypothetical trade for a Jacob Chikrin or anyone really, I mean, he's got 3.5 on the books. He's got this year and he's got next year, and he's a guy that, for all the talk, has really kind of silenced the doubters in some way. He's been really strong this year. He's actually scoring at a higher pace than, I mean, the guy who just signed that nice big fat extension in Seattle, Jared McCann. I mean, it's really fascinating to see how his role has kind of shifted and grown and changed as a Maple Leaf. And it's nights like tonight that are really tantalizing in terms of, does he have a future on this team? Is he maybe, is he an internal option for that top six role?
I feel like he is an internal option for the top six left wing role. We've seen him plugged in there throughout the season quite often, and I think he's done a pretty good job at that position. I think obviously he could upgrade that top six left wing position, but I like the fact that Alex Kerfoot, he's a versatile player. He can play center, he can play left wing, you can move him around in the lineup a lot. But yes, he is someone that is always being mentioned in any Maple Leafs trade talks.
Yeah, and it's kind of a nature of the beast when it comes to, the way that the Maple Leafs have structured their contracts. They've chosen, and I think to a degree rightfully so, to really lean in on that core four and pay them ultimately market value. I mean, every single one of them is, 1, 2, 3, 4 in scoring on the Maple Leafs. They're all hovering right around a point a game or above. I mean, Austin Matthews, what is there to even say about him? He's just on a different planet right now. But you know, as a result of that, it's going to cost you a guy like an Alex Kerfoot or I mean a guy like, going back, a Kasperi Kapanen or an Andreas Janssen. So, Kerfoot's really kind of carving out a niche here, and it's intriguing to me how that kind of niche he's carved out is going to impact the next, week and change with the deadline. And of course, when we're thinking really far out, what that means for his role with the Maple Leafs this summer and potentially into next season.
You know what? I really like the comparison you just made of Alex Kerfoot comparing him to guys like Andreas Janssen, Kasperi Kapanen, because those are pieces that the Maple Leafs discussed moving on from. Eventually, they did move on from them. And that's something that we're going to see more for as long as the Maple Leafs have that much money locked up in their core four. There's going to be more moving pieces. It's like trying to find the matching pieces in a puzzle. You have to solve the puzzle, and there's going to be a lot of moving pieces every offseason. It seems Alex Kerfoot's always in these discussions, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him be traded at any point in time. But he's really solidifying his role out there.
Absolutely. And I mean, I mean, there's more guys. I mean, you rhyme off, the Zach Hymans, where he just ultimately priced himself out and deservedly so. He earned his contract. But the thing that the Maple Leafs are going to have to continue to do is add these guys like the Michael Buntings, who, are on a really cheap contract and are really succeeding in their role, or even an Andre Kasha, who's been, when called upon has looked the part, or David Kampf, who's been really specialized in that third line role and has been really, really strong defensively. So it's going to be a rotating cast of characters around that core four, and the question is where does everybody kind of fit, like you said, like a puzzle piece. But I'm really happy with kind of what Alex Kerfoot has brought to the table this year. He's really elevated his game, and he's had these lulls, like any player would. But I mean, he really is carving a bit of a niche here that is, I think, really invaluable as a secondary piece. And for his price tag of around that $3.5-4 million range is pretty fair.
Yeah, it is a pretty fair contract. I definitely agree with that. We're going to move on to tonight's third star of the game, and that is a former Toronto Maple Leaf. What a surprise. Alex Galchenyuk, who opened the scoring in this game. I had him as an anytime goal scorer in this one, so thank you for that, Alex Galchenyuk. But one goal, one assist out there tonight, and, you know, doing what he usually does, trying to be a bit of an agitator out there. It wasn't a pretty goal at all. I don't think any of the Coyotes' goals were necessarily pretty, but Alex Galchenyuk shipping it home, and I think he's deserving of the third star of the game.
Yeah, and obviously a benefactor of a a benefactor of a not so great Peter Mrazek performance. But I was a big proponent back this summer when the Leafs ultimately let him go of trying to retain him, and that obviously isn't what happened. But he's had his ups and downs, as many players on the Coyotes have, but really kind of showed tonight, what he's capable of. And I mean, you could close your eyes and put $20 on or whatever money on any former Leaf coming back and contributing against them, because that's always really how it seems to go in Leafland. But I mean, Galchenyuk really kind of looked pretty good out there, had his moments. And I mean, I believe he also may have contributed during the overtime. I don't know if he was in on that goal, but certainly I noticed him during the overtime frame. He had some opportunities and helped set some up as well. So I think a deserving third star, especially, I mean, the Coyotes won the game, right? I mean, that's that's how it tends to work. But he really looked pretty solid out there, and might be another guy that the Coyotes choose to move on from when the deadline rolls around.
Oh, for the sake of Alex Galchenyuk having to make all these moves, as long as he doesn't want to be moved, I hope he doesn't get moved. I mean, what's he been on 5 teams in the last 3 years now, something like that, maybe even more. Uh, you know what? I thought he played well in Toronto last year, and I would have liked to seen him stay in Toronto, but ultimately ended up landing. The Coyotes ended up landing him this past offseason, and uh, it's nice to see him, you know, putting some points up on the board. But again, he's really had a tough go of it when it comes to being traded, being moved. So for his sake, let's hope that he settles in somewhere.
Absolutely. No, he's been a really kind of interesting story to follow over the years. He's had his moments where he's really shined back in Montreal, and even has been a contributor back in Pittsburgh, I believe. But I mean, for him, you may as well not unpack your suitcase.
Yeah, right. And I want to get to a comment here from Terry. Terry M says the Leafs need to unload Tavares, the worst contract ever. Okay, so Terry, I just wanted to let you know that the Toronto Maple Leafs cannot offload John Tavares because there's something called a no trade clause, and I do not foresee Kyle Dubas trying to move John Tavares, or B, John Tavares waiving that no trade clause to be sent away from his hometown team.
Yeah, and this has been a conversation, at times this season about, has Tavares' play been worth his contract? And there's been questions at times, but I think that there's also needs to be a kind of an understanding of really what he brings, even off the ice. I am the last person when it comes to intangibles, but he's been a huge contributor as the Maple Leafs captain, right? He's the face kind of the locker room, or maybe not the face, but he's the voice of the locker room rather. And he's, for all the talk, he's still right around that point of game pace, right? And I understand the kind of notion that you're paying a guy $11 million. You want him to be an $11 million contributor. But I also think it's worth kind of remembering that he came here as a free agent, and there were other teams that were offering him more money. Namely, I mean, the San Jose Sharks offered him, I think, 13 and a half. So he took a hometown discount. So even as an aside from that, I think that it's worth considering and worth remembering that, the vast majority of players are underpaid. And I don't think Tavares is that different. And I'm not going to say that he's, dramatically underpaid, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast, is that you're probably getting about market value for the type of player that Tavares is.
And you know what? John Tavares has put up 54 points in 58 games this season. It's not like he's having a horrible year. He had a down stretch where he didn't score for 14 games, and he had a 20-game stretch where he didn't score a goal 5-on-5. But I feel as if he's been coming alive these past few games. The criticism that he's facing after tonight's game, I feel as if it might be because of that. There was a play where Nick Robertson blindly passed the puck to John Tavares as he was getting off the ice. That's not a John Tavares thing. But that's a Nick Robertson thing. You need to fix the. You need to not make that pass. It's a rookie mistake. It's okay. He'll get past that. But back to John Tavares, I really think that a lot of the criticism he's faced is unfair. Leafs Nation, Toronto, the city. I remember July 1st, 2018, I believe it was. This city exploded for John Tavares signing in Toronto. Like, Twitter that day was insane, and it was Canada Day, but really it was John Tavares in Toronto Day because everyone was just so excited about the signing. And now, after a couple of years of not having that playoff success that you want to see, and he's faced some adversity through injuries as well, he's getting a lot of criticism, and that just has to do with this this market here in Toronto. And I want to go back to an interview I did with Marty Biron back in November of 2020. I interviewed Marty Biron. He was a teammate of John Tavares's in Tavares's rookie season on Long Island, and John Tavares was 18 years old at the time. Marty Biron actually invited John Tavares to go out to an entourage thing, downtown red carpet event in New York City, and John Tavares declined the offer because he had a game 2 days later. Like, John Tavares is a lead by example type of guy, and you've been talking about not just his impact on the ice, but off the ice. And say what you want about his contract, but his impact inside the locker room, that's a massive impact.
Absolutely. There was an episode of the Leafs Blueprint that was dropped, earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday. And I mean, you see him in the locker room presenting Wayne Simmons with all the, awards and gifts for his 1,000th game. John Tavares, as much as he kind of gets some hate, he's one of the heartbeats of this team, and it really is, a core four. And they each bring different parts to the game. I mean, obviously Matthews is, as I said, different planet, but I mean, Marner's got his elite playmaking and kind of underrated shot. I mean, Tavares is kind of, I think in a lot of ways underrated in terms of his offensive output. And he's obviously also part of it is that he's not getting the minutes that, a Marner and a Matthews are getting. So he's not getting as many opportunities to score and put up points. And then of course, William Nylander, I mean, he, I think, is extremely underrated in terms of what he brings. He's looking like he might be a point a game player this year, probably going to hit a career high in his point production. So, they all bring a unique element, and it's important not to discount what Tavares brings to this team, of course off the ice, but I mean even on the ice. He's a significant contributor and a really important piece of this team, especially if they're hoping to go anywhere once spring blooms and playoff hockey is around.
Absolutely. And I want to go to a point you made about William Nylander, because it seems that William Nylander and everyone there always has to be someone getting criticized, and it's fair. It's fair to have criticism. I think tonight the main criticism should be on Peter Mrazek. I mean, we could go on and on about that, but John Tavares, not his best night out there. William Nylander. I see a comment from Terry M saying Nylander's too streaky of a player. It's all Matthews and Marner bunting. Okay, yeah, that top line has been outstanding, but Terry, every player has good stretches, bad stretches. Even Austin Matthews. I mean, when he's not at his best, he's still one of the best players out there, but he tends to score his goals in bunches, and with William Nylander, it's no different. It's just at a different level.
Yeah, and I also think, I want to I want to highlight the comment by Hurt Locker 66. The the cap and obviously, I mean, just things have kind of been so out of the team's control that it's really hard to have kind of foreseen this. And of course, the expectation is that the cap, skyrockets. I mean, the expectation is that you've got new ESPN money, and the expectation is you've got new Seattle Kraken money, and ultimately those don't come around. But the NHL was tracking for $100 million salary cap as soon as maybe 2025, 2026. So that's another thing I think worth remembering is there's been a lot of kind of things out of the Leafs' control, out of everybody's control over the last handful of years that, have really kind of thrown a bit of a wrench in the Leafs' plans. But even with that said, I mean, they've really, in a lot of ways, made the best of a not so great scenario. I mean, you look at obviously the acquisition of Jack Campbell and the way that obviously turned out very successfully, at least initially, lately not so much, or these depth signings like as kind of the aforementioned Bunting and Koshing and Kampf. There's ways that the Leafs have found ways to work around this kind of stuff, right? So I don't necessarily fault them, and I also think that there's some benefit of the doubt to be kind of earned the way that they've managed to adjust on the fly and have success.
Yeah, I think they have done a good job. This front office has done a great job at working on the fly, and yeah, they did kind of get screwed with the COVID cap situation. But with that being said, I'm being more of a pessimistic viewpoint here, Jory. Uh, this is also something that every team in the National Hockey League has faced, and they just it's based off the way that they've constructed their rosters. Like you don't see very many teams with a lineup this top heavy in terms of their contract negotiations, and yeah, it's a tough situation for sure, though.
Yeah, and there's a lot of contributing factors here. I mean, you go back to the 2016 and 2017 NHL drafts, which, right around now would be graduating to the Maple Leafs. I mean, unfortunately, I think Timothy Liljegren is basically the only guy out of those two drafts that has become a contributor. And the rest of them, you had a couple of games of Adam Brooks, and you had a couple of games of, goodness, I don't even know who else from those drafts, and those are really huge kind of gaps in their kind of development system in terms of more cheap talent that should be on its way to the major league club, right? It's just an unfortunate kind of set of circumstances, but they've done a good job finding these bargain pieces. And listen, I don't think Kyle Dubas is infallible by any means. I mean, to me, if we're being frank, I mean, he ultimately kind of swung and missed on all I'd say three of the original kind of three prospects, contracts in different ways, but none of them have been handicapping, and all three players have more or less kind of lived up to their contract. It's just you're not seeing these huge wins of a Tampa Bay, of a Colorado Avalanche, and that's just that's something that the Leafs are in a way sorely missing, but also just it's just kind of it's the hand they've been dealt, and they have to make the best of it. And I think in a lot of ways, despite these roadblocks, they've done pretty well to make the most of their situation.
I would agree, and I feel as if the Toronto Kyle Dubas in the front office, they've done a great job at filling in those pieces that we talked about. They've done a really good job at finding pieces that weren't necessarily on everyone's scope. Like they've gone bargain shopping in a way with pieces like Andre Kasha, Jason Spezza, Wayne Simmons, even Michael Bunting. They found a lot of these low contract value players that are performing at a high level. But the downfalls that I would say this front office has had is, firstly, I feel as if Kyle Dubas was a bit too lenient with his contract negotiations. He got pushed around, and you can say the William Nylander thing. I think that that contract's excellent, personally, probably the best contract on this team. But with the Austin Matthews contract, I would have liked to seen him get more years. I understand why Matthews would want that bridge contract per se. The Marner contract, I would have liked to seen him not get paid $11 million. He's a great player, but I'm still a bit hesitant to say he's an $11 million per season player. And the other thing, I was listening to a rant from Carlo Koliakovo the other day, former Toronto Maple Leafs defenseman. I'm not sure if you heard this or not, but his rant, it was a very valid point. He was talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs through their draft since Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan have really taken the reins here. The Toronto Maple Leafs haven't drafted and developed defensemen well at all. You have Timothy Liljegren and Rasmus Sandin, but outside of those, the Maple Leafs really haven't drafted and developed any defensemen that are playing at a high level right now.
Yeah, I don't know that I would agree with that. I'd maybe wait maybe a year or two and then maybe return to that because there's a lot of guys, listen, they don't have any top two defensemen in the system that look like they're going to be bona fide stars. I mean, Rasmus Sandin could be that. More likely, he's maybe a second pair guy, but a really talented one. However, the Leafs have a lot of guys, down in the minors, defensemen that look pretty good. I mean, off the top of my head, I mean, Philip Kroll has had a lot of success with the Toronto Marlies. Mac Hollowell has had a lot of success with the Toronto Marlies. I mean, I'm trying to think of more. I mean, Topi Niemela looks right now like one of the biggest steals of that 2021 draft. There are guys that are on their way, and Dubas has only really run the draft since 2018, so we're just starting to see kind of the fruits of his labor with the Rasmus Sandin pick. But there's still a lot of guys in the system, and I'm obviously missing all kinds of them. Those are just the three guys off the top of my head, but there are guys coming at every position that are worth getting excited about. I mean, Ty Voigt looks really interesting. I know he's a guy that you've done some kind of research in. I mean, Roni Hirvonen looks really interesting as a piece. Nick Abruzzese looks like a really interesting forward prospect. Matthew Nyes is another guy that just played, at the Olympic Games. And it's also important to recognize that, their prospect system today isn't their prospect system 6 months from now, because you can flip these guys and turn them into a defenseman. They might just, they might end up turning a Matthew Nyes and a Nick Abruzzese into maybe not a Jacob Chikrin, but certainly there's guys out there, defensemen, that you could parlay these prospects into roster pieces for. So I would say that is a little bit of a short-sighted take. I mean, Timothy Liljegren, actually, believe it or not, wasn't drafted by Kyle Dubas. He was drafted by Mark Hunter, who was running the Maple Leafs drafts at that time. So there's still some time to kind of see. And obviously, prospects are such a crapshoot as it is that who knows how many of these guys become NHL contributors. But there are enough guys in their system with, interesting enough attributes that I think it's just a little too early to make a, widespread statement about that they've struggled to develop defensemen.
See, I still disagree with you. Like you made some compelling points, and Topi Niemela, yes, I think that he does have a lot of promise. I believe he's a third round pick in 2020. But my point is, they haven't taken any defensemen early in the draft, and that's when usually you get the most value for your picks from a defenseman. And I would have liked to seen them take at least one more defenseman in this point in time. Yes, you can flip them. You can flip these picks and potentially acquire more assets, but how long is that sustainable for? You need someone who can come in and play defense. Someone like Morgan Riley, like someone that you draft 20 in 2012, and he has been steady all the way through. I feel as if the Toronto Maple Leafs, if they could have drafted one of these guys maybe 3 or 4 years back, they might be in a different situation right now.
I mean, if you want to hear the honest truth, Rasmus Sandin might be that guy. He's been, next level talented for the Maple Leafs by the metrics. He's one of their strongest puck possession defensemen. He's one of their strongest defensemen by expected goals. I mean, he's been out the last few days or last few games rather. So maybe it's not top of mind, but Sandin has that potential. And he's not the offensive juggernaut that Morgan Riley is, because it's worth remembering that Morgan Riley was a 5th overall pick and probably goes 1st overall in that draft if you're doing a redraft, because you've got Nail Yakupov obviously going 1st overall. And there's, of course, that famous quote from Brian Burke where he goes, "I would have taken Morgan Riley 1st overall," and he looks like a genius right now for that. So I don't know that I would and I'll let you go, but I don't know that I would agree necessarily that things are as dire as they maybe look.
See, I have high hopes for Rasmus Sandin. I think he's a great, talented player. He's demonstrated that. He has a lot of potential, but I just feel that they need more at the defense position. It's been an issue for years. Last year was an exception, and maybe that has something to do with the fact that they played 6 teams all season long. But I mean, it remains to be seen how these draft picks end up playing out. There is a long time for their development, but right now they could definitely use another one of those homegrown talents on their blue line. And I'm not sure that Timothy Liljegren's going to be the answer down the stretch. We'll see how that plays out. But right now, I just feel like they could definitely use help on their blue line, and that's something that they're going to have to do through a trade.
Yeah, no, there's questions. I mean, just as we've said, all episode, all post game discussion, right? There's questions that are surrounding this team, and they're going to need to find some answers if they're trying to, go anywhere once the playoffs roll around.
Definitely. There's a lot of questions surrounding this team right now, and we don't have all the answers for it. We can offer our opinions, but ultimately it's going to come down to what the front office of the Toronto Maple Leafs end up deciding to do. Uh, I'm not sure if we covered this question or not, but for anyone that may have just tuned in, we'll ask it one more time before we head off the show tonight. Obviously, not the goaltending performance you'd expect from Peter Mrazek tonight. Eric Källgren came in, played a fantastic outing in his first appearance with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, my question I'm asking you is, who would you start Sunday in the Heritage Classic against the Buffalo Sabres?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. I wish I had an answer for you, and I really don't, and I do not envy Sheldon Keefe. He's going to have to make a really tough decision. The reactive part of me wants to go Eric Källgren just because he looked really steady in there. But I mean, I think back to a number of years ago when the Vancouver Canucks had that Heritage Classic game, believe against the Montreal Canadiens. I don't necessarily quote me on that, but regardless, I mean, I'm sure you recall this, where they started Eddie Lack over Roberto Luongo, and it was a big part of what chased Luongo out of town, right? And I'm not comparing this situation with the Maple Leafs right now to, the Eddie Lack, Roberto Luongo, even Corey Schneider, epic saga that went on in Vancouver for years and years and years and years. But it's it's worth remembering that the stakes are raised, in these nationally televised outdoor games. So are you going to trust, Eric Shalgren, who played, what, a handful of minutes tonight? Or, do you go Peter Mrazek? But he's really struggled. It's a difficult decision, and it's just not something that I envy Sheldon Keefe, whatsoever, having to decide.
Yeah, definitely. That's a tough decision that he's going to have to make ahead of Sunday's Heritage Classic, and obviously a big stage in front of a ton of fans, outdoor game. Everything's going to be under a microscope in this game, especially the goaltending after the performance here tonight. On one hand, you have Peter Mrazek, veteran goaltender in the National Hockey League. He's been struggling with the Toronto Maple Leafs. He got shelled by the Buffalo Sabres for 5 goals last week. He got, I mean, he looked horrible out there tonight against the Arizona Coyotes. And on the other hand, you have Eric Shelgren, who is a young goaltender, not much NHL experience, and you could throw him into the fire, but that's a big stage, and I'm sure there would be a lot of nerves for him going into that one. So, I mean, I'm hesitant to answer this too, but I almost feel like you have to go back to Peter Mrazek in a way.
I mean, you know what? It's tough. I like the way Andrew thinks. I think David Ayers maybe a sleeper. Maybe he's the guy that we go to. But in all seriousness, it's just a tough decision that Sheldon Keefe is going to have to make. And who knows? Maybe we get the wool pulled over our eyes, and maybe all of a sudden, we wake up tomorrow morning and Marc-Andre Fleury is a Toronto Maple Leaf, right? So it's just so hard to even say, who gets the start. I think, like I said, from an emotional kind of just pure emotion perspective, I like Shalgren, give him the go, see what happens, right? But it's so tough. It's just so tough to make a decision on that.
It is very tough, and thankfully, we're not in the position to make these decisions. Uh, I mean, yeah, Sheldon Keefe has his work cut out for him this Sunday and beyond, potentially, with the goaltending situation in Toronto right now. It's been a
Yeah.
mess. So we've been on here for over an hour discussing this back and forth wild game between the Arizona Coyotes and Toronto Maple Leafs. 5-4 victory for the Coyotes in an overtime thriller. Uh, Jori, would you like to give your closing words for our viewers here on Maple Leafs Media?
All I can say is that hopefully, Sunday rolls around, Maple Leafs are able to put this one, in their rearview mirror and go out and, put together ideally a strong, solid, and hopefully uneventful performance, when they face off against the Buffalo Sabres at Tim Hortons Field in Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what you're hoping for. That's what Sheldon Keefe's hoping for. An uneventful game. It's been a while since we've seen one of those for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Jory, thank you for coming on here for tonight's post-game show. Make sure you check out our Twitter accounts. We're both sports journalism students just getting into the industry, so our Twitter handles are down here below. And you know what? I'll make it easier for you. I'm going to pull up the links to our Twitter accounts, and we'd appreciate your support if you could give us a follow.
Much appreciated. And thanks everyone for watching. Really appreciate the support, and want to thank Jake, of course, for letting me throw my 2 cents in every now and again as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Great analysis from you all night long. So the link to Jory's Twitter account has just been dropped into the comments section, and I'm also going to drop my Twitter account. So make sure you follow us on Twitter. Again, tons of content.
Make sure you follow Jake. We're rapidly approaching 100 followers for you, huh? You're making some progress here.
Yeah, I'm getting close. I
Getting
just
close.
got into the Twitter game, so
Shoot him a follow. He's worth following. He's a good follow.
thank you, Jory, and thank you everyone for watching this show. Have a good night.